everyone, this is Sarah and welcome to my crochet channel. Now today's video is lesson 9 in our Back to Crochet Basics. Now if you remember, back in lesson 3 we learned how to single crochet and how to join it into a circle, and we made this cute coaster. We stitched in circles, stitching single crochets. We joined and chained one. Now today we're going to be talking about another way to crochet in a circle, and it's called continuous rounds. So this technique of stitching single crochets in continuous rounds without joining and without chaining one is actually a Japanese technique. It comes from two Japanese words called ami, which means to crochet or knit, and gurumi, which means a stuffed animal or stuffed doll. Ami, gurumi, really hard to say, and that's why I call them stuffies or softies. For our lesson portion of our video, I'm going to demonstrate how to stitch in continuous rounds and then how to increase and decrease in order to get a ball shape. And then for our practice project, we're going to make a ball. You're going to need an H crochet hook, which is a 5.00 millimeter crochet hook. You're going to need a needle for weaving in ends. You'll need your scissors and some worsted weight number 4 yarn. Now, we're also going to need a stitch marker. We'll need this to mark rows. If you don't have a stitch marker, you can use a paper clip, you can use a safety pin, or you can use another piece of yarn to mark your rows. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So we're going to begin with learning how to stitch in continuous rows without doing a join or chain one. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start with our slip knot, and we're going to chain 2 chains. All right, we're going to begin with placing a single crochet in the second chain from the hook. Here's our first one, here's our second. So we'll put our hook through, pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through both loops. That's our single crochet. Now we're going to single crochet 5 more single crochets right in that same chain 2 that we began. One thing to remember when stitching in continuous rows to make a stuffed animal or doll is that you want to make your single crochets tight, because if you stuff it, you don't want your stuffing to show through. One, two, three, four, five, 6. All right, so I've stitched 6 single crochets for our demonstration. Now, normally we would join to the first single crochet with a slip stitch and then chain 1. We're not going to do that. When you stitch in continuous rows, your row 2, you begin stitching right in that next single crochet. Well, let's say whatever pattern that we're working says to stitch 2 single crochets in each stitch around. Well, because we didn't join, we don't have any way of marking our rows. So what you can do is take your stitch marker and mark where you began. This one is just a little jelly style, and I'm going to slip it through that first stitch. Get in there. There we go. And that will tell me where my rows will begin. If you don't have a stitch marker, like I said, you can use a paper clip or a safety pin. And if you don't have those, just take another piece of yarn of a different color and just lay it across there. Then when you stitch your next row, you'll know where you began. I'm going to go ahead and take my stitch marker out and use this to mark my row just to make it easier for you to see what I'm doing. All right, so we're saying we're not following any particular pattern because we're just practicing here, but we're saying that the pattern called for 2 single crochets in each stitch around. So I would go right in that next single crochet. Like I said, no joining and no chain 1, and we've marked our row. So I'm going to stitch 2 single crochets in each of the single crochets around. This is called increasing. When you stitch 2 or more single crochets in the next single crochet, that's called increasing, because you're increasing from our beginning 6 single crochets to 12. All right, so here's where we marked our row on that stitch. So I'm going to put 2 single crochets in this last stitch. And then let's say our pattern says just to put 1 single crochet in each row. So what we would do to begin the next row is we would mark this next stitch with our stitch marker. Just put it through there. We'd move it from that row to this row, or whatever we're using for a stitch marker, or we can take that piece of yarn and just wrap it over, and that tells us that that is the first stitch on the next row. So let's just make 1 stitch in each of the single crochets around. And again, remember, we want to make our stitches tight so that our stuffing doesn't show through. So I did an increase. We went from 6 single crochets to 12 because we put 2 single crochets in each of the 6 single crochets. All right, so I'm back around here. Here's my yarn. I didn't pull it through at the top there, did I? I should have, but we'll pull it back this way. All right, so now this next row, I'm going to teach you how to decrease. And when we decrease, we're going from 2 stitches to 1. In other words, we're going to decrease 1 stitch. All right, so I'm going to put my hook, move that black yarn over. To make a decrease stitch, I'm going to go in this first single crochet and pull up a loop. And then I'll go in the next single crochet and pull up a loop. I'll yarn over and go through all 3 of those loops. And what I've done here is I've taken 2 single crochets and made it into 1. I'll show you again. We go in the next single crochet, pull up a loop. We go in the next one and pull up another loop. You'll have 3 loops instead of 2 on your hook. Yarn over and go through all 3 of those loops. And you'll notice that when you do this, the sides of your ball will come in. All right, I'll show you one more time and then we'll do our practice project. Whoops. I'm pulling tightly because I want my stitches to be close, and that happens sometimes. Your hook jumps out of your yarn. 1, 2, yarn over, go through all 3. See how that works? Alrighty. So that's how we single crochet in continuous rounds, how we increase and decrease. I think we're ready for our practice project now. For our practice project portion, we're going to be making a little ball like this. So you'll need some polyester stuffing of some kind, just a little tiny bit. You'll need your worsted weight number 4 yarn, your stitch marker. You'll also need your crochet hook, H 5.00 millimeter crochet hook. You'll need your needle for weaving in ends and your scissors. For our practice project, we're going to begin the same way we did when we began our lesson. We're going to make our slip knot and chain 2. We're going to place 6 single crochets in the second chain from the hook. There's our 6 single crochets. We're going to use our stitch marker and mark that right there. So that tells us that's the first stitch of our next row. And like I showed in the lesson, you can use a piece of yarn or a paper clip or a safety pin to mark your rows. So we're just going to move that to the side so it's not in my way. And we're going to stitch 2 single crochets in the first stitch of the next row. Whoops, there we go, 1 and 2. Now we're going to stitch 2 single crochets in each of the 6 stitches, and we're going to increase from 6 single crochets to 12. So by stitching 2 single crochets in each stitch, we're stitching increase stitches. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Be sure and count your stitches. We're going to take our stitch marker out and we're going to mark the first stitch of our next row. And this tells us that this is the first stitch of our next row. And when you're stitching in continuous rounds like this, it's very important to mark your rows. Now for row 3, we're going to only do an increase stitch every other stitch. So our first single crochet, we're just going to stitch 1 single crochet. Then in the next stitch, we're going to stitch 2. And then we'll repeat this around. 1 single crochet in the next single crochet and 2 single crochets in the next. 1 single crochet in the next, 2 single crochets in the next. And something you'll start to see is a round ball forming. 1 and 1, 2, 1 and 1, 2. Now here's where we have our stitch marked right there. So we're going to take that and just move it up to the next row. There we go. Row 1 should have 6. Row 2 should have 12. Row 3 should have 18 because we increased each row. Now that's the last increase row that we're going to make. This next row, we're just going to place 1 single crochet in each single crochet around. So we're keeping it the same amount of stitches. We're not increasing and we're not decreasing. So 1 single crochet in each of the single crochets around. And remember, try to stitch those stitches snugly. The tighter we can get them, the less likely that our stuffing will show through. Now, I do occasionally have it show through. That's normal. But it's just something we need to practice, and even I need practice trying to get those stitches tightly. All right, we're coming back around here. So I'm going to count my stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 stitches. Now, this is the outside or the inside of our ball, and we want to push that in because this nice and neat section is the outside. All right, so I'm going to move my stitch marker. Oops, got caught on my yarn there. Up a row. There we go. These little gel ones just don't like to stick in there very good. All right, so you can see that the ball is starting to form. And what we're going to do for row 5, 6, 7, and 8 is just stitch 1 single crochet in each single crochet around. And this will give us a total of 5 rows of just 1 single crochet in each single crochet. After we finish the 5th row, we'll begin our decrease stitches. At this point, you should have 8 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here's the end of my 8th row. Here's my stitch marker for the beginning of my 9th row. On our 9th row, we're going to begin doing some decrease stitches. So what we'll do is we'll just place 1 single crochet in the first single crochet, and that's where our stitch marker is. Then in the next 2 stitches, we're going to stitch a decrease. It's also called stitching 2 single crochets together. So what we're going to be doing for row 9 is we'll single crochet in the next stitch, and then we'll stitch a decrease stitch using the next 2 stitches, or what's called stitching 2 single crochets together. And we'll do this all the way around for row 9. So 1 single crochet, then a single crochet, decrease. 1 single crochet, then a single crochet, decrease. Moving all the way around till we reach back to our stitch marker. Decrease. Now I'm going to move my stitch marker, and I'm actually going to go ahead and pull it out. And what we're going to do now is we're going to stuff our ball, and I probably have more stuffing than I need here, but I'm going to go ahead and stuff it in there, a little at a time. Oh, I'll just put it all in there. Be a nice tight little ball. And then for our last row, we're just going to stitch decrease stitches. So we'll put our hook in, push that stuffing out of the way, stitch a decrease stitch, then we'll do the next one and stitch another decrease stitch. We'll do that again. There we go. Just moving around this last row of our ball, stitching all decrease stitches. All right. So now we're back down to having 6 stitches. We're going to cut our yarn, give ourselves a little bit to work with, and we're going to tie that off. Snug it down, and we're going to use our needle to close up that hole. There we go. And we'll just go around those stitches, pulling them in gently. There we go, pulling them in tight, but gently. And then what I do is I go up to the next stitch and then I just go the opposite direction. And that's just going to help the ball stay nice and tight. All right, then I just go in and push that needle out. I get a little bit of a pull and a snip. And there's our little ball. This is a great project to practice those increase and decrease stitches as well as stitching in continuous rounds. You can add a little bell in here and it's a baby toy or a dog toy, or just use them for games around the house. They're just super fun, or fill them with sand or beans for bean bags. Well, I hope this helped you learn about continuous rounds, increasing and decreasing. I'll see you at our next Back to Crochet Basics lesson.